of Atlanta divorce law groups, we won't back down. And the Monday evening is always about how we won't back down from continuing to create forward movement in our clients' lives, despite the craziness of this pandemic that's going on. And this evening, Jeanette and I thought it would be really pertinent to discuss how income reduction in so many households impacting alimony and child support obligations. Sadly, more and more households are getting wage cuts. More employers are cutting back wages and reducing employees' payroll. And for that reason, this really impacts people's ability to meet their obligations for alimony and child support. So Jeanette and I want to discuss this tonight. And Jeanette, thank you for joining me from home.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. So Jeanette, let's go through the alimony obligations first. Alimony is basically spousal support, and it is due to the party who is in need, paid by the party who has the ability to pay. In Georgia, no real formula, but it's really just a case-by-case basis on the ability to pay and the need for it. How is all this wage reduction that's occurring in so many households going to impact alimony? What options are available to our clients?
So there's two types of alimony. One's called periodic and one's called lump sum. I'm not going to delve into all the differences, but if you have an alimony obligation and you are not able to make that obligation because you have a significant reduction in income, it's definitely worth it to have a consultation with an attorney to look at your final order or settlement agreement to see if that alimony is modifiable. Because some types of alimony payments are modifiable if you lose income.
And then in this case, for a lot of courts, they're going to completely recognize this fact that this is involuntary, that somebody has had a reduction, because that's a big deal too for alimony reduction, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And child support as well. Really, the law closely resembles each other on when you can modify that down. And it being an involuntary loss of income is a requirement for the modification. But yeah, if you're furloughed, laid off, you didn't have a choice in the situation, you're going to be able to get that modified.
So then let's talk about how child support works. And child support obviously is usually a much more long-term gain. It is based on a formula, the worksheet that the Georgia courts administer and we follow. But there is actually modifications that you can look into every 2 years. Outside of that, it's based on significant change in income. And we could, for a lot of households right now, be facing that trigger for the significant change in income, correct?
Correct. So even if you received your last child support order less than 2 years ago, if you had an involuntary and significant reduction in your income, you can file to modify. Now, there's some things to take into consideration. One is that the other spouse's income also matters in the child support calculation. So, don't rush to file, but it is important to file if it makes sense. So it's important to have an attorney run that calculation for you and see what that reduction would be. If you've gone to zero income or very minimal income, it's probably going to be essential to file.
Now let's talk about how important it is in these cases for this to be filed. Because you and I have seen too many horror cases where we've had clients come to us where they had a handshake agreement, a verbal agreement, and it's gone very, very wrong, and it's hurt the person who was, relying on that verbal to their detriment.
This is one of the most difficult things I see in family law. It is so common for people to be co-parenting well, for the person who has a child support obligation to have a layoff or some kind of loss in income, and they come to this verbal agreement or even an agreement through text or email about suspending payments or reduction in payments. And I see this all the time where a few years later, the co-parenting relationship falls apart or the other parent falls upon hard times, and suddenly they go back on that agreement.
Right.
The bottom line is there's a court order. And until that court order is changed, you're supposed to be doing what's in that court order. And it needs to be filed. And this is also really important, is you don't want to drag your feet on filing. because once you file and get the other party served, if you've lost at least 25% of your income, that modification amount can be retroactive to the date of service. So even though the court system's slow, if you get them served and then several months go by before you get an order, you still have protection where the court can modify that amount back to the date of service. Whereas if you wait and just stick your head in the sand and hope things will work out, you can get slammed. And non-payment of child support is something that people go to jail for. So this is not something to mess around with.
Yeah, the agreement is not a defense to that.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things we've been helping some clients out with currently, Jeanette, is the temporary agreements specifically just to deal with the COVID-19 with the hope that, and we can file that and make it temporary with the hopes that when things get back to normal, or the plan is that the economy will pick back up and most people will be able to get back to the income that they had and get back to the original plan. Can you address that a little bit as well?
Yeah, so it's also important to realize that even if you believe you're going to be employed again in a few months, or this is only temporary, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't file, because again, that order says you owe that amount. So if even you think you need, a 3-month, 6-month grace period, you still need to file, and we can get a temporary order in place and then just sit on it and wait and see what kind of income you end up having when this issue is resolved. And then if you're making the same amount of money, then we can dismiss the case. There's all kinds of things that we can do and go back to that initial child support amount. So it does not mean that you are you're saying you think you're always going to make this lower amount of money and you need a permanent reduction. We can get a temporary reduction, which is very important.
It's definitely a thing to do to make sure that you have something in place if this thing goes on longer than we all expect, because at this point, who knows how long.
None of us have a crystal ball, and it's really important to protect yourself. We don't know exactly how all this is going to play out, and it's important to just get that in place to make sure there aren't issues down the road.
Well, thank you so much, Jeanette. I appreciate you joining me tonight on this. And guys, please reach out to us if you do need any help with a temporary agreement to get you through the pandemic, or if you have any questions about the current agreement you have in place, we're glad to assist you with that. And do feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions that you would wish for us to address on our Facebook Live series. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.